So as you know, at SHIFT.stream, we're looking at people's lives and we're trying to understand and unpack what are the factors that have ultimately allowed a person to become what they are. So let's start off just discussing your career at the moment. You are quite a prolific scientist, very well-known Singularity University speaker, to name but a few of your accolades. You've got a long list of accomplishments. Would you tell me a little bit about your current career and how you define yourself?
Sure. I think fundamentally, I've always thought of myself as a scientist, probably even before I was a scientist. But then I did go to a bunch of very fancy schools, and I got a piece of paper that confirmed that I'm afflicted with scientism. And I loved that work. I loved being an academic. I was a neuroscientist, specifically what's called a theoretical neuroscientist. So we'd study the brain using machines. We'd study the machines to come up with, we'd study brains to come up with better ways of understanding machine learning. Arguably, many of the people that gave rise to deep neural networks came right out of our field of research. In fact, NeurIPS, one of the big conferences in theoretical neuroscience, is fundamentally also one of the biggest conferences in machine learning. But I live in the Bay Area, and as so often happens to people out here, I got an idea. How could I take some machine learning and mix it up with education? And so I started an educational technology company, and then I sold that and started another one. And then I was the chief scientist at one of the first companies doing AI for hiring, which turns out to be incredibly challenging. And then I was involved in another company involved in jobs and machine learning. So I started a bunch of companies. I was the chief scientist at a few others. And along the way, I also just found problems. Sometimes they literally walked up and knocked on my door and said, hello, I'm here to stay. And other times we went and looked for them, but they were problems that weren't a job. They weren't a startup. They weren't a scientific problem. They were just problems that needed to be solved. And what I discovered across all three of those things is that what I really loved was using the scientific method to first explore and understand a problem, and then come up with an actual potential solution, something that could exist in the real world, and then bring that solution to life. I never really cared about writing up science papers. I still do that every now and then, because if you don't tell people what you did, you're not really doing science. I never really cared whether my companies made money. I was dumb lucky enough for good things to happen, but I know I'm not the greatest businesswoman of all times. Having said that, 5 companies, chief scientist at a bunch of others, I know how it's supposed to work. I just don't care enough to keep doing it. So what I do nowadays is I started this philanthropic lab called Sokos Labs, and we just take problems. It could be anything as long as it's about people. There are plenty of very interesting problems that aren't about people, and there are probably plenty of truly uninteresting problems that people desperately want to pay me to work on. So instead, we take problems ranging from, my mother has bipolar disorder, please help me to save her life, or my daughter has 500 seizures a day, through to what should our country do about its education policy, or what should be the UN's global position on ethical AI. If it's about people, then I'll pay for everything. My team tries to come up with a truly unique solution. In other words, don't come to us unless nothing else works, because my starting assumption is we need to look someplace completely new. And if we come up with anything, we give it away. So it turns out it's not a great startup idea. It turns out spending all of my money solving other people's problems and then just giving the results away doesn't make me a lot of additional money. It is a great way to get rid of money, though. So if you have too much, I have a suggestion for you. But what is nice, though, is the way I see it is I'm an intellectual venture capitalist. I am investing in a future that I want to live in, a future I want my kids to grow up in. And it turns out it cost me a lot of money to get that future. It takes a lot of sacrifice to create the world that you know should be real. And if we're not willing to do that, well, then it's not going to happen. So this is what I came to realize. It's what I love to do. It's also what I'm literally willing to pay to do. And so I just followed some very simple rules that I learned in the latter part of my life. And this is how I spend my time. The best way I can make my kids' lives better is to make the lives better for every other kid in the world. That's just comes right out of some of my own research. And so that's what we try and do.
That's an absolutely earth-shatteringly meaningful message. So you're like a scientific philanthropist who is just utilizing and leveraging skills to try and better and improve the world for other people. And you're willing to give that away, you're willing to fund that. And that must be, I mean, that is a hugely selfless thing. And you're leveraging obviously what's a very rare and unique skill set in your lab, but it's a hugely selfless thing. So how you mentioned some problems that came around to stay. How do you become this person who is willing to do for others in this way?
Well, let's also be honest. It's what I'm good at. And quite frankly, although I am an exceptional chief scientist and I get some very fancy job offers in that line, I'm better at this. I will freely admit, as much as I might admire a lot of amazing multi-billion-dollar founders out there, I am not good at taking orders. In fact, I am the classic definition of an entrepreneur, which is someone who is otherwise unemployable. So, I learned the hard way that, I could go in for a year or two, make a bundle at some place, and then get out just ahead of everyone hating me for not doing what I'm told. But what I decided is just focus here. I actually think my life will be better off. So it's all, I know the way you're framing it. I understand that. And I don't think it's trivial to go out and do things without an immediate expectation of return. But then I truly believe that there is a return. I truly see myself as being a certain kind of selfish here, a long-term selfish with respect to my kids, with respect to myself. And the way I came to this is that earlier in my life, when my decisions were short-term selfish, and I don't mean in some way that deserves scorn, I mean in the way that it is for everyone else. When all of my decisions were about this idea of who I was supposed to be and what my accomplishments should be, and am I happy? Nothing worked. It was, it's easy in a set of stories about yourself to sort of try and pull out people's sympathies and ask people to shed a tear for you. And I had some hard moments in my life. I wish more CEOs out there had spent a moment in their life where they didn't know where their next meal was coming from, because I know what that's like, and it's scary. It is terrifying, and it changes who you are to go through that for a few years. But at the same time, I actually was born, maybe not into wealth, but my dad was a doctor. I grew up in California, on the coast. Nonetheless, I grew up, in Monterey, like this beautiful, I suppose Cape Town is a rival for beauty, but still, Big Sur was how I spent my summers. It was lovely. Mm. And in fact, I grew up in this place that John Steinbeck wrote a book about called The Pastures of Heaven. I literally grew up in a valley called the Pastures of Heaven. So I was born into something kind of wonderful. And not only that, my father had been this amazing student when he was young, but he did not grow up with that same sort of level of, if you will, privilege. He was the son of a sharecropper in very rural Kansas. And he was brilliant, but never really had the opportunity to fully become the person he always saw himself. So when I was born, I was supposed to win a Nobel Prize. I was supposed to be this amazing scientist that transformed the world. And interestingly enough, growing up in the pastures of heaven, I wasn't alone. My best friend was supposed to win the Pulitzer Prize, for that matter, the Nobel Prize in Literature. And my other best friend was supposed to become this amazing engineer, build anything. We all were born into this world where we were supposed to be amazing. And actually, if you had to work hard at it, then that wasn't your thing. Find that thing where you can just effortlessly be the very best in the world. And there was something about growing up in that era in coastal California where that was the ideal. All these little white boys who think that they will be the next, pick your person, Einstein, Ken Kesey, whatever it might be. And that's who I was. And the more I tried to be that person, the more everything fell apart. Literally by the time I was in the earliest grades of school, I was already struggling. I wouldn't get any work done. The teachers, they didn't hate me for me. I was actually an incredibly quiet little kid, but they hated this little kid that wouldn't try and never made any progress. And the reason I wouldn't try is I was supposed to win a Nobel Prize. And yet at 7 years of age, I would do something and it wouldn't be worthy of a Nobel Prize. And I would feel like a failure. And it infused everything about me that I was smart and I was a failure. By the time I reached secondary school, high school, I was carrying failing grades into the end of every semester of school. If it wasn't for standardized test scores, I probably would never have even gone to university. But I did very well on those, and I got to go to my choice and almost immediately flunked out and ended up homeless. So I had a lot of amazing strengths. I think I can look honestly back, particularly given that I research a lot of these questions. I can look honestly back and say, wow, I had a lot of really raw cognitive ability. I had a lot of positive role modeling from my parents about how to be curious about the world. I had a very good education, even though I wasn't making any use of it. I was a terrible student, and yet I had this wonderful education. Turns out that's not enough. It's not enough just being smart. It's not enough thinking you deserve a thing. And I learned that the very, very hard way. And by the time we reached 1995, I had a calendar and I was crossing off the days till the end of the year, because it was going to be my very last year. And when I reached the end of the calendar, that would be it. I would end my life. That was where I was in that moment. Not because I was selfish. I wasn't stealing. I didn't run a Ponzi scheme. But I felt like such a failure because everyone expected me to be this amazing person, and I'd failed at it. And none of those, again, sort of short-term selfish decisions, none of them worked. So I needed something different. And, my life comes in 3 flavors, and there was everything up till that moment. And then there's everything I talked about, more recently, all the amazing stuff I get to do and the traveling around the world. Not right now, but normally. I think I'd have been to South Africa at least twice by now this year. And then there's this middle period between not killing myself and actually discovering that I could be happy. And in some ways, I think that middle period, which was about 10 years, is the most valuable experience I certainly could have ever had. But I want to figure out how to bottle it, because people shouldn't have to go through what I went through to get out the other end. You shouldn't have to ruin people's lives just to be able to build a better one, even your own life. So, it seems such an obvious thing. Don't ruin someone else's life just so you have a better one. Well, don't ruin your own life just so you can have a better one. And I know I haven't shared the middle story yet, but how can we reach a point, which I fully believe is attainable, where everyone gets to do all of the crazy mad science that I get to do, and yet they didn't have to be homeless, and they didn't have to hate themselves. They didn't have to be lost in the wilderness for years. Instead, they get it simply because it is the right of being a human being to have an amazing life that you get to share with others. And so I'm happy to share that middle story, but I will tell you the whole reason I do what I do today is I don't think I'm special. I think anyone can do what I do. And I want to find something, some way. I wish it was a little pill, a secret ingredient, a magic wand, but instead it's much more complex than that. I want to understand how you give everyone the amazing life that they were actually born to have, and avoid all of the loss and all of the horror. Of course, life is always going to have its struggles, but it doesn't have to be that we churn through the lives of billions of people just to get the tiny handful that have the chance to really impact the world.
So that's true. That's a magnificent way of saying it, and I'm really excited to dig into the middle bit. But I mean, the way you frame this is that you've actually gone through a mental process of long-term selfish optimization to create a world that will allow a better world to be created, to actually allow a better world to be created, but not that the ends is what you're necessarily after, but that this is your core passion and fundamental purpose. And I'd love to just understand what goes into the realization of that, what goes into figuring it out, because there are so many people out there who I believe inherently know this and just never get the freedom or ability to give themselves permission to get that bravery to explore it, to go and create it. So how does that happen? Is that the middle story?
For me, it's the middle story. And yet I wouldn't wish the first two parts of my story on my worst enemy. I mean, not the first part. And the second part is the comeback, but it's a pretty bleak one. It's a hard one, hard emotionally, I will say. I mean, everything that the interesting thing about these three parts of my life is in the first one, I was born into privilege and everything got worse. My perception of myself and the real life I was living. And, you know, roughly since the early 2000s and in this millennium, slowly everything got better and better, and literally every year there's little bumps, but everything gets better. It may seem crazy, but I've been doing Sokos Labs now for several years, and for an organization that by design loses all of its money, we get bigger and bigger every year. Our revenue goes up, which means we can run more programs and help more people. It doesn't make any sense. But again, those middle years were so interesting because everything about my life was getting better. And yet my perception of myself for most of it continued to get worse. So here is the thing that those years being homeless, in some sense did for me. So I had this night in 1995 in fall. I've got a gun. I'm trying to figure out why I should be alive. I've only ever disappointed myself, disappointed everyone else. I have never in my life accomplished anything of any value, of any note. And pretty soon I'm not going to be able to keep up the ruse anymore because no one really knew how bad it was. No one knew that I was homeless. I was clever enough to hide it all. And it was all going to come due very, very quickly. And so that was just going to be the end. And what I decided was that it wasn't about me. That may seem like it is an easy thing to say. You have to understand what it means to really internalize that. Every decision I've made about me to this point, the first 20 some odd years of my life, when it was about me, it only made things worse. It shouldn't have. I'm still not saying that I was malicious or even negligent. I was doing what I was supposed to do. I mean, how is being the kid that wins a Nobel Prize a bad thing? But the more I tried to be that person, the worse everything got. And so I just wanted to end it. And in the end, maybe this isn't ironic, but the reason I didn't do it is there was only two people left in my life, realistically, in that moment, which were my two parents. And I just didn't want to hurt them that way, right? This wasn't a cry for help. This was just sort of self-euthanasia. I just was done. And I just couldn't do that to them, which meant I needed a way to make decisions in my life, a way that was different than be the person everyone expects you to be, me included. I expected me to be that person. So instead, I just came up with this arbitrary rule. I kind of derived it from something my father once said, which is live a life of substance. And he lived a good life. I mean, again, this kid that grew up on a farm in Kansas, nonetheless was now this sort of high-flying doctor. He'd teach rounds at the Stanford Medical School, and he'd take us skiing, and we had a pretty good life. But before we went skiing, before we went out and had our sushi and all the things that our good life had brought us, he would take us to go do home visits to his patients, which, you know, even when I was younger, was not a thing doctors did anymore. Yet he would go out, he'd visit with these people. We would spend hours going home to home. And he keeps saying, almost done. We're going to go have that sushi real soon. And yet we'd go, and it's this, you know, it's the 70s and the 80s. So it's okay to leave your cars locked in your kids in a car in California summer. You know, no one's going to take you to Child Protective Services. But so we just sit out there and wait. And he'd go into the hospital and he'd do these home visits. And what you learn is you can have an amazing life, but you have to do what's right first. And early in my life, I just didn't put that together. But I had this moment where I needed some other reason, some other way. I'm a nerdy machine learning person. So let's call it a cost function. I needed a cost function by which to evaluate my choices. And the one I came up with is live a life that makes other people's lives better. No decision I have made in my self-interest has helped me. It has only made my life worse, both internally and externally. Live a life that makes other people's lives better. Well, I'm homeless and I've kept it hidden. So number one, tell my parents, just admit to them that I flunked out of school, admit to them that I was homeless, admit everything. And then, you know, just by living my life, admit to everyone else that I'm not this amazing person they think I am. Get a job as a clerk in a store, just so that I can pay rent. And then I worked in a candy store. And, you know, at that point in my life, I was thinking, you know, the ideal life, I'm going to get a job in a bookstore and I'll find myself a little apartment. And at least I love books and I can spend the rest of my life doing that. I had no expectation of anything that was coming next. But live a life that makes other people's lives better. And crazily enough, these opportunities just kind of emerged. I still feel like I'm a very lazy person, but suddenly I had the opportunity to run an abalone farm in Santa Cruz, California. And my God, it was like Lord of the Flies with migrant labor. And then suddenly, after 2 years of running a company that was fundamentally broken and learning you can't make anything perfect, I suddenly had the money to go back to school. And I go back to the exact same university I flunked out of, did my entire undergraduate degree in effectively a single year and got perfect grades in every course. Like I had never had success like that before, not remotely. I had my choice of any grad school I wanted to go to. I ended up studying psychology, neuroscience, and machine learning, all mashed up at Carnegie Mellon University at this place called the Center for the Neural Basis of Cognition. You know, I got to do research on people. I got to do research on brains. I got to do research on machines. I got to combine it all together. And again, paper, Nature, and this crazy superlative success. And, you know, now we're maybe 10 years out. This is this middle life. And it's worth noting, I still hated myself. But this is the important thing that I learned. Again, I want everyone to learn, but I don't want them to learn it the way I did, which is for 10 years, I still hated myself. I was still never good enough. I was still fundamentally unhappy, but it wasn't about me and it wasn't about my happiness. Whereas before, I would literally have gone and hidden under the bed. I would have simply given up. Every time I hit a wall, it's not about me. It's not about my happiness. Who cares if this isn't perfect? So I deserve their scorn. Totally imagined. Nobody hated me, but it doesn't matter. I have to do this anyways because it's the right thing to do. And I simply moved through life this way. And it maybe it sounds like I'm patting myself in the back, but it was brutal. I mean, again, I would not wish it on my worst enemy to truly hate yourself, and yet force yourself to move forward anyways. And here's the funny thing, just to tie this part of my life up, suddenly I reached a point in roughly 2005, just about 10 years after the near suicide, where I had this amazing career as a scientist. And this clearly demented woman had fallen in love with me. And so I had this career and this relationship, and everything was right about my life. I mean, I hated myself, trivial, but everything was right about my life. And so now it's my birthday, October 19th, 2005. And it's late in the evening. We're about to fall asleep. This woman is now my fiance. As soon as we finish our dissertations, we're going to go get married. And I turned to her and I said, "You want to know my deep, dark secret?" I said, "I wish I was a woman." Intending nothing. It was out of nowhere. I had no intentions. I was literally just sharing because I'd already gotten comfortable with the idea that it's not about me. I'm always going to kind of hate myself, and not just as an issue of gender, for every reason you can imagine. And I'll just go forward. So I guess the rule there is be careful what you say to your loved ones in the wee hours of the night, because shit happens and suddenly you are a completely different person. But the wonderful thing is I was wrong. I could be happy. But what I now understand is this amazing career, launched as a scientist, then an entrepreneur, and now all the kooky mad science we do now. The fact that I have this family, my 2 kids and my wife, the fact that I am happy and I get to be me, those are the gifts. I didn't work for those and earn them. I didn't work for any of this. They were pure gifts. And this is the real dilemma. I have a poster over here titled "Small Sacrifices," if you can see it. And it is actually a whole field of research here now at Sokos Labs, is this paradox. The best metaphor I could give you is the people who win the race are the ones that stop and help the other racers, which doesn't make any sense. It shouldn't work that way. And yet I start from my life, and every time I ran the race full tilt, I lost, and I lost bad. And it was only when I stopped trying, and not even that I cared about helping the other racers per se, I just stopped trying to get to the end. I just studied what was going on around me, and suddenly my life got better. And then I started taking the things I studied and helping other people, and my life got better still. And finally, I feel like I win every race without even trying. It's not what I'm doing. So we have this whole field of research, someday books and an app we're working on, so forth, that is all based on this paradox, which is the fact that people that make sacrifices in their life actually have better outcomes, which is not how it's supposed to work. You know, aren't we all supposed to be rationally self-interested? Isn't that what I was doing before? I wasn't a jerk, but I was rationally self-interested. And yet it isn't until now where I run a little philanthropy that just gives away our intellectual capital for free. And suddenly my life is better than it has ever been. I'm not delusional. I could start a quick startup, turn a quick profit. I could be a chief scientist at a giant company. And yeah, I'd make a lot more money, but boy, I wouldn't have what I have, which is astonishing. And it is better than 99.999% of the world has in even the most gross material terms. So this is it.
It truly is astonishing. It's astonishing because this thing that you're doing is so unique. It's so different. It's just such an incredible experiment of what the possibilities are in a way, in and of itself, let alone the things that are being produced from it. But this thing that you're doing is kind of one of a kind. And so perhaps we don't all know these lessons, these messages. And that is astonishing is the only word that can describe that.
Well, I mean, it's interesting you put it that way, because I've said myself many times that Socos Labs is itself a meta experiment. Our research into issues of purpose and sacrifice are far from the only things we look at. Right now, we're working on an updated model of bipolar and diabetes. We have this giant project called the Inclusion Impact Index, looking at all the jobs and patents and economic activity generated by the kinds of entrepreneurs that don't come to mind when you think of entrepreneurs. Someone like me, maybe, for example, an LGBT entrepreneur, someone who's gone through gender transition. Trust me, a bunch of Stanford and Harvard frat brothers don't want to give me money. And yet they were simply wrong. When I finally was able to find my traction, my companies were very successful, but I didn't fit their profile. So we built this amazing thing to track it in real time using fancy machine learning. I get to work on all these projects, but one of these core ones is this issue about sacrifice and purpose. People that have a strong sense of life meaningfulness, a strong commitment to some purpose, whatever it is, something that's bigger than themselves. They lead better lives. I mean, and by this, I mean, think anything you would want to be true about you when you're 65. It is substantially more likely to be true if you have a strong sense of purpose, increased life meaningfulness, and our single biggest, in our research, our single biggest behavioral correlate, the kind of measurable thing that people do that predicts a strong sense of purpose, is they make sacrifices. They take actions for which they will not receive a direct benefit, which again seems like a paradox. How could they have the best life outcomes if all they're doing is making sacrifices? Couldn't that be abused? Couldn't it? All of that's true. It could. It turns out there's a difference between your economics 101 model of the world and the world the way it actually works. And the way it actually works, people that make sacrifices have better lives. And there's a lot of complex, totally nerdy things we could talk about why that is. But Socos Labs itself is a meta experiment where we're saying, well, if making sacrifices gives you a better life, then I've got the worst startup idea of all time. We're going to build products, and it's going to be a new product every 3 months. And then we're just going to give it away. We'll let other people build it and charge for it, or we'll literally just give it to people directly. Or in some cases, like with some of our education work and the Inclusion Impact Index, we'll build it and then we'll continue to fund its existence for free, and anyone can use it. And yet, this experiment, admittedly, N of 1, but we've now continued for a few years. This experiment gets better and better every year. So it is a curious thing to see just how far I can push a truly terrible idea.
It's so counterintuitive, as you say. There's this unbelievable paradox to it that is so meaningful as a meta experiment of itself. You've taken the ideological thinking, the ideas that have kind of driven your own life and encapsulated them in this research organization, which is starting to prove itself and flourish, which is absolutely incredible. So now it's not just your own nervous system doing all these things out there in the world that are positive for others. It's actually this organization as well, and the reach of that organization is so potentially exciting because of the motivation is just for impact, for building a better world. And
yeah, I mean, it's really nice because if nothing else, I get clarity. Any project we're working on, I pay for, and so I know I want to do it. I'm not doing it because it would delight our customers. I'm not doing it because it would make the CEO or the board happy, or because I have an intuition about some sort of financial outcome. I'm doing it only because I believe, our sort of original tagline for Shokos Labs is maximizing human potential. I'm doing it because I believe the world with this project in it is better than the world without it, for everyone. Could be wildly arrogant, self-aggrandizing, but at some point we have to actually make some decisions and do some things. And I've got no other guidance than what I genuinely believe is true. And, given that I'm paying for it, what I believe is true, if I essentially go against my own self-interest, then boy, am I really believing it. It's kind of like an economic version of the scientific method, which everyone focuses on the measuring of things and the running of experiments. But actually, I think the core, most important message, the most important philosophical lesson from the philosophy of science is prove yourself wrong. That is where everyone gets it wrong, even scientists themselves. Prove yourselves wrong. Every good thing that the Enlightenment and science has brought to the world as a whole has come from prove yourself wrong. The other parts of science are, I love it, but that is the transformation that I think truly accelerated humanity. And so, why not essentially bet against yourself in a funny way? I get involved in these projects, and if they're really successful, it actually costs me more than if they're not. So when we go in there, we know we want the world on the other side because I know what it's going to cost me to get there. And so it becomes this big, giant commitment, incredible clarity that this is the right thing to do. And, it's interesting. You brought up the word courage earlier, and I was asked to give a talk, the closing keynote for the Grace Hopper Conference. So this is the largest event for women in technology around the world. The audience was like 30,000 people. It was like giving a talk to the weather. You tell a joke and there's a squall of laughter over here that, moves across the plains towards the mountains. So it's an interesting experience. Yeah. It's like some sort of network model taking place right out there.
A wave function of laughter.
A soliton wave. There we go. We'll nerd it up a lot here. And so I gave this thing, and I was asked to give a talk about courage. And I was so annoyed at the topic that they asked for my tagline, and all of the speakers and everyone had to come up with this line that started with "We will be," and they were all these uplifting messages. And I thought, I'm supposed to give a talk about courage. Screw that. So my tagline was, "We will be scared," because courage isn't something that you are. It just isn't. Again, I thought I was supposed to be smart. I thought I was supposed to be a Nobel Prize winner. And I guess in the brain of a heroic American, I thought I was supposed to be a hero, which comes with courage. And I wasn't any of those things. Smart, but it turns out that alone isn't enough. And so what I got up on stage and told all of those largely young women was, courage isn't something you are, it's something you practice. It is hard. It is something that you have to work at. And if that moment comes where you need to make a sacrifice and you haven't practiced, you're not going to make a good choice. Courage is the moment when what you really want and what the world really needs diverges. And it is the choice you make. And the stakes, of course, change. There is no, I just read a paper literally yesterday that said, in fact, forgive me getting neuroscience-y, but the use of cognitive control in some prefrontal parts of our brains out through a network into our parietal actually makes dishonest people more honest, but it makes honest people slightly more dishonest. And if you think it through, maybe you begin to understand people that are systematically more honest are more honest because that's become their default mode. They whether by birth or role modeling and development or hard work, practice, they have become courageous in moments of challenge. And for them, it actually takes cognitive control to not be that person, to say, you know what, rationally, there's zero negative consequence. I'm going to take this one extra Oreo cookie out of the jar. Whereas for the sort of naturally dishonest person, the effort is in making the honest choice. So in other words, our cognitive control overcomes whatever we've trained ourselves to do. That thing we trained ourselves to do is the easy thing. And it turns out it can be easy to be honest, but only if you practice. But here's another twist that wasn't in that paper. What is easy for you is a function of the thing itself. So there are some things that are hard for some and easy for others. There are some things that are easy for everyone. And then there are those moments, particularly in the startup world, where there is $1 billion over here. And then there's the world you'd truly like your kids to grow up in. And by your kids, I mean every kid. $1 billion is going to help your kid, I will freely admit, quite a bit. But every kid over here. And it comes with $1 million, but that's $1 billion. And if you haven't practiced, you're going to pick the $1 billion path. And hey, they'll write articles about what a business genius you are. You'll live in a giant mansion. And you will know for the rest of your life, the world will be a little bit worse, because when you needed to be courageous, you weren't. And this is a big thing, particularly in AI ethics. I get asked about this all the time. I've advised countries about this. Again, that people want me to be on a board, like, you know, some wizened graybeard like me is going to just show up and say, here's the magically ethical thing to do. Do these choices and everything will work out. Like it's so simple. Or here's a checklist you can follow. No, it is always hard. When these choices matter is when they are hard, and you have to practice. I got my practicing for free. My practicing was do this or kill yourself. My practicing was 10 years of today, do I give up or do I keep working hard even though it doesn't make me happy? And most people shouldn't be forced to wait 10 years before all of those right choices pay off. But boy, what a good lesson it was for me.
I can only imagine. And we're speaking now about this concept of this cognitive momentum, this cognitive direction that you've forged. And we spoke earlier about that inflection point in your own experience and journey where you kind of changed, and that your perception lagged what your reality felt it was, or what you believed your reality to be, perhaps more rationally, because it was quite objective and scientific. Your perception, however, was still seemingly declining. You had cognitive momentum that until you reached that inflection point, suddenly then you realized what could be the outcome that makes you happy. So the story you told now is wrapped up so well.
Yeah, I mean, it seems so good, right? Yeah, it took a solid 5 years for me to sort of climb out of the deep hole I dug for myself. That first 5 years. But life was better. I mean, I wasn't homeless. I wasn't wondering where my next meal came from. I may have been making minimum wage, but turns out that was better. When the stress was gone and I was honest with everyone, it felt better. I was a fundamental disappointment, but it wasn't about me. And then I had this job. I got to be the boss of this admittedly crummy little company, but what an experience. I lived on the cliffs above a freshwater swell of the Pacific, and I could see the humpbacks and the mothers and babies navigating along. And yeah, the company was destined for failure. And the entire thing, like every member of the board of that company wanted to sue every other member. I think they wanted to kill every other member. But my life was better. And then I went to school and it was better and it was better. And yet, I'm going to be really honest here. I had terrible insomnia. To be able to fall asleep, I would imagine people beating me, just beating me up for no reason. That's how, it was the only way I felt like, you know, I'm such a horrible person. But if I could just imagine being set on fire, just terrible things happening to me, then and only then could I feel like, all right, I've suffered enough and fall asleep. At least I never slipped into the trap of actually doing these things to myself.
Absolutely.
But that was my nightly. And by the time it's approaching 2005, I'm regularly watching the sun come up. I have, just delirium-inducing insomnia. I'm engaged. So many things were good about my life, and yet so many things are bad. And then I come out to my wife, and she shared this story. She knew that I was unhappy. She knew that I had this terrible insomnia, and we stayed up all that night talking. And then the next night, my head hit the pillow, and I fell right to sleep. And I've not had a single night of insomnia ever since. It's a little humid and hot in California. That's still hard for me to sleep in. I'm a desert kid. So that notwithstanding, that kind of interior voice that you can't quiet, that just went away. And so many other things just went away. Yeah. And, in that sense, it was as close to a kind of a miracle, a supernatural event that a fundamental humanist rationalist like me can ever appreciate. It just overnight went away. Something I'd lived with for 20 years. I'd seen neurologists about, I'd taken medication, none of which helped. And just all I needed to be, quite frankly, was honest about who I actually was.
And incredibly moving concept.
Yeah, and I love what my wife said about it. She was asked in an interview, actually, for Gayle King at Oprah Magazine. She was asked, the person you loved has changed so much. Why are you still together? And she said, the person I love was unhappy, and I knew it. And now she's happy, and I love her even more.
Amazing.
And, to have all of those good things come together, even as I felt so negatively about myself. But then there was the moment when I got to be me, and I got to have my family, and I got to have this amazing career, none of which I had worked for, all of which was just live a life that makes other people's lives better. And all these good things came about. It wasn't overnight. I'm not saying it was easy. None of those things. This is not a quick fix. This isn't self-help. But I will say, as a person who's now actually researched this and looked at hundreds of thousands of people's worth of data, I might be an outlier in the impact on my life, but this process is not unique. One of the single biggest predictors of productivity inside companies, of individual productivity of employees is, do they make sacrifices? Which, on your job, doing something that doesn't help your career, something that isn't just you carrying out what your boss asked you to do, but we're able to actually measure and see people's impacts on teams they are not on. Things that no one's ever going to review in their annual 360 and say, you get a raise because of this. The people that help those other teams the most are also the ones that have the best career outcomes. They earn the most money. They have better insulin sensitivity when they're elderly. Their walking speed at age 65 is on average higher. So stop trying to win the race. Help everybody else.
That's an incredible observation. And something else that's incredible about this is at that point in time when you were going through these devastating life circumstances, which are overwhelming just to consider or just to think about. And I can't imagine the years of pain and agony that you went through on your own and faced silently. And yet what strikes me as a decision about empathy, others, prevented what could have been a devastating loss to the planet. Because you say you considered your parents' view of losing you, and you were so ready to take that step. And I'm sure there are so many people out there that have the most extraordinary destinies ahead of themselves that they can create and manifest in kind of a way that you have. But the world loses out on that opportunity because they aren't supported in that moment, and because perhaps they haven't got that inner strength to consider it in such an empathetic way. And that's truly remarkable.
If I look back on my life as a case study rather than as me, I own my mistakes. I am the one that failed. Maybe that's unfair or overly harsh, but it's the only way. Take control of what you can take control of. I can't control the circumstances of my life. I can only control bad decisions that I made, even if they were made innocently or naively. But if I look back on myself as a case study, then I have a totally different perspective. My perspective is, how is someone like me even allowed to fail? I built the first AI to treat diabetes. I was the chief scientist of one of the first companies to use AI to take bias out of the hiring process. And I think we still did it better than anyone has done it since. I've invented things that have saved lives. I've invented things to reunite refugees with their families. I've built companies, created jobs, and again, forgive the bragging here, but none of it should have happened. You're absolutely right. 19 times out of 20, the person that was me in that car pulls the trigger, and I had, again, every advantage. What about the kid in a favela in Rio that doesn't have all those advantages, but is just as capable as I am? They've got a treatment for the next coronavirus in their potential. But the simple truth is, unless they happen to be really good at football, no one's ever going to know that potential. Or maybe they live, in a tin shack outside Johannesburg, and their mom cleans some white woman's clothes, and their grandmother cleans some white woman's clothes, and they're amazing. They know they could go to university. They know they could change South Africa, but instead, they do what seems like inevitably what their life will be. They don't continue to study. Instead, they go and clean someone's clothes, when in fact, they could have built a company and transformed their town or the country or all of Africa. And all of that potential gets lost. And when I say I believe everyone can do what I do, I am neither delusional. People are heterogeneous. We are different. We have different strengths, different opportunities, but also, one, you're never going to know who those right people are. To quote the Pixar movie Ratatouille, not everyone can be a great chef, but a great chef can come from anywhere. Except I actually believe everyone can be a great chef. They're just going to be different at it. They'll bring different strengths to the table. If you saw every life as valuable, every life as someone that not could, but given the right opportunities, would save your own child's life, then what harm do you do in stepping over them because they're passed out in a gutter? You only harm yourself, most in the long term. So again, I guess I'm putting the selfish back in philanthropy here, but I just don't understand a world in which we don't see everyone's potential for what it is. And that goes to the privileged world we live in. I don't have anything against Amazon, but how many potential amazing world transforming people are simply delivering packages right now? Or working in fulfillment centers, or doing non-creative tasks simply because the world couldn't be bothered to tap their potential. So I want this. And again, let's step away from a utopia where everyone is magically able to achieve this. Right now, maybe 1 to 3% of the world's population really gets to contribute in a creative, meaningful way. We all potentially get to live wonderful lives, but gets to contribute in a way which wildly changes the life of someone on the other side of the planet. That should be 1 billion people minimum. What would it mean if 10 times as many, an order of magnitude, people got to do what I do? I don't. The only thing I can say is, I guess I'm not enough of a science fiction writer to imagine that out of nowhere. I just know I want my kids to be a part of it.
Yeah. And thank you for building a better world. And it's a remarkable story. And I'm immensely grateful for your time today. It's been a real pleasure to hear from you and learn from you, Vivienne. Thank you so much.
It was such a pleasure.